We're going to have kind of a summary of some of the stuff we learned this week. Some of the stuff we're going to do today will be questions a little bit geared more towards kids. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today are going to be questions that will be kind of interactive and geared towards you adults. So you get to answer some questions too during this a little bit and get some reactions to some things, because I'm curious of what you think about a few of them. You're also going to hear from some people you probably never thought you'd hear from in church, a little bit, because we're going to do some comparing and contrasting of transcendence and immanence and different worldviews. So it's been said that there's really only two ways to live your life. One is if everything is a miracle, and the other is if nothing is a miracle, right? Two different ways to look at things. And those two ways to look at things you see all over the world in the different worldviews people hold. But those are two primary ways we're going to kind of look at things today. And the transcendence and immanence of God, you're going to find there are people who believe in God, who believe He's big and powerful, but He's not involved in day-to-day life, right? And you're going to find there are scientists who believe that too, probably at their core. But you're going to hear from a few people you thought you never heard from church today, and we're going to see what they think a little bit. Bill Nye will be one of them. You're also going to hear from Richard Dawkins a little bit, if you know who that is. And let's see, who's the last one? It's he pushed a lot of the alien stuff and passed away in 1996. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Hang on a second, we'll get it. But when it comes up, you'll be like, oh yeah, I know that name, because it's blanking on it right now. Anyway, what's that?
Von Donegan?
No, different. But I think you're going to enjoy them. And some of these you may have seen, these little interviews that we're going to share with you in different places too. But I think you're going to really find it interesting to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting here with me today. So this is Romans 1:8. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. Right? So some of this speaks to how God is beyond our limits of understanding and beyond the ordinary for us. So Merriam-Webster, as we learned at the beginning of the week, describes or defines that transcendence as extending or lying beyond the limits of ordinary experience, being beyond comprehension, right? We also, I think I put it in here, talked about how in a theological sense, transcendence could mean God is above and independent of His creation, right? More powerful, lives beyond that, created it to follow the rules and stuff, but is separate of it also. And sometimes this is something that's really hard for people to reconcile, along with the fact that God is interested in us and in our everyday lives and invested in us and wants relationship and process, right? So God is big, right? And we covered that a little bit at the beginning, where we talked about or showed you that video, right, with all the stars on the first night. Some of you were here with that. And I'm going to attempt to, this thing shut off, but I'm going to try to bring it back up here. And see if we grab that one. Nope, that's a different one. There we go. We're going to attempt to bring this one.
Of God, the sheer magnitude of His power and size. It's a tough concept to wrap your mind around because God is spirit. So there's nothing physical about His stature. He can't be measured by meters or miles, time or space. However, it might be possible to catch a glimpse of what we can't see or touch by taking an imaginary journey through His biggest creation.
Remember what we were talking about.
This spacecraft will transport us to the edge of the observable universe, an estimated distance of 270 billion trillion miles. We'll travel at the speed of light, more than 186,000 miles per second. At that velocity, we could make at least 600 complete orbits around the Earth, in less time than it takes to eat a small bowl of popcorn. On January 1st, hurtling through space we reached the moon in less than 1.3 seconds. Then 4.5 minutes later, we race past Mars. We continue on toward the gas giant planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And just 5 hours, 20 minutes after leaving Earth, we reach the dwarf planet, Pluto. Now we'll adjust our flight path for an angle nearly perpendicular to the planetary orbits. Behind us, the boundaries of our cosmic neighborhood quickly vanish. We have entered interstellar space, the great void between our solar system and the next nearest star. A year passes, then 2, 3, 4 years. Finally, on April 19th of the 5th year since our departure from Earth, we are momentarily blinded by the light of the Alpha Centauri system. 3 stars bound together by gravity. They are the closest stars to our Sun. We have traveled nearly 26 trillion miles, but we're just getting started. 10 light years from Earth, 24 neighboring stars glimmer in our wake. One of them, Tau Ceti, resembles our Sun. 100 light years, clouds of gas and dust in the Orion arm of the Milky Way surround us. 1,000 light years, the elegant spiral shape of our galaxy is clearly visible. Earth is located here. The Milky Way is part of a community of at least 40 galaxies drawn together by gravity to form what is known as the local group. For the rest of our journey, each point of light we see is no longer an individual star, but an entire galaxy filled with billions of stars. Our local group is adjacent to the Virgo cluster, a massive concentration of an estimated 2,000 spiral, elliptical, and dwarf galaxies that emit searing clouds of plasma and dust. This spectacular creation is the heart of a chain of cosmic islands, once shaped by the gravitational pull of 40,000 different galaxies. Collectively, they form the Virgo supercluster, one of the largest structures known to science. But as our view widens, this chain is quickly lost among countless formations of similar composition and size. For Virgo is a drop in a cosmic bucket that may contain as many as 10 million superclusters, each a slender thread in the large-scale construction of the observable universe. Our journey has transported us 45 billion light years from Earth to the outer limits of scientific discovery. A sprawling web of filaments spun from perhaps 2 trillion galaxies, and stars more numerous than grains of sand on all the deserts and beaches of the world. So how big is God? He's big enough to create a universe with dimensions so vast they are beyond our comprehension. Yet in the words of the prophet Isaiah, he could measure it all with the fingers of his hand.
All right, so do you remember that from day one? And then we looked at the stars out there and all that stuff. So, here we have another verse. This one's Romans 11:33. Oh, the depth of the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. Right? pretty hard to grasp how big God is. So we're going to hear now from Carl Sagan. How does that sound? A little bit. And we're going to kind of compare and contrast some stuff. So Carl Sagan is an astronomer, planetary scientist, or was, cosmologist, astrophysicist, astrobiologist, science communicator, author, professor, and I would define him as an atheist. Though he himself adamantly refused to be labeled as an atheist in most cases. And we're going to talk about that actually at the end of today a little bit, and why he said that, because we're gonna learn something from that too. But we're going to hear from him now and get a little bit of information. So from this one, what I want you to be kind of paying attention to is a couple things. One, Carl Sagan, he's the one I was trying to remember. He was a proponent of various theories dealing with the existence of extraterrestrial life, right? He was convinced that humankind needed saving from ourselves. Sound familiar? Like maybe something that actually is from the Bible? And he was convinced the way that was going to happen was through aliens someday, if we ever got along that far, right? Interesting, right? A little bit different than what we believe. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and watch this through, and I want you just to listen. And you parents also listen. You can all be involved in doing this. And if you hear, which you're welcome to too over there, Pastor John, if you hear something that you're like, that is doctrinally not sound, that doesn't match up with Scripture, you just raise your hand for a second. We're going to kind of know when those times are, right? See if we catch that many of them. There may be fewer than you think, but we're going to see how many of them we actually catch on to. Okay, here we go.
Might not seem of any particular interest.
Well, I better clarify what this is because it starts in the middle of something a little bit. So, this is after the Voyager spacecraft took that famous picture with Earth and a beam of sunlight as a little blue dot, right? From way out in our solar system. And so the size of the universe with the tiny little speck-like nature of planet Earth, right? Was being really understood by people on this Earth. They really saw it for the first time in a picture. So here we go. And this is his response to that and what he said really.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization. Every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they can become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel, on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to
save us from ourselves.
Interesting, he got quite a bit of that right, didn't he? He definitely seemed to understand that there's something broken about mankind. He had some understanding, though I'm sure wouldn't have tied it back to an original sin or the Bible, for a number of reasons. He was adamantly against anything that looked like Christianity, and was pro most anything else. We're gonna learn more about that later and how he didn't define himself as an atheist and what exactly that meant. But he actually really, I think, understood that humanity was lost and needed help, based on what he said there. Wouldn't you say so? He just wasn't willing to admit that God exists, that the God of the Bible exists, for a number of reasons, probably. We'll come back to that in just a second. So that's a worldview, right? That really speaks to the grand size of God. This is somebody who really understood how big the universe is, according to modern science, right? So he grasped something from it. Okay, we're going to pull up another one here. Next, we're going to be hearing from, if it'll come up, otherwise I'll just jump back over. Oh, I didn't plug it in all the way. This guy, Bill Nye, the science guy, right? Or the sort of science guy. So, we're going to be learning about something from him here, or about something that he believes. So, American mechanical engineer, science communicator, and television pop star, I would say, but presenter, right? So, here we go. We'll pull him up next.
So I'm God, standing on a plane compared to me. Really, I'm just a speck standing on this big planet. But the planet, compared with the star, is just another speck. And the Earth is orbiting the Sun, and the Sun is a huge star. And our star may be a big deal to us, but my friends, our star is just another speck. So I'm a guy, I'm a speck, living on a speck out on the edge of the galaxy. I mean, it's not really in downtown Milky Way, it's way out on the side. We're just a speck on a speck, orbiting a speck. Well, I'll tell you what else. There's billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of specks, and then billions of galaxies. I mean, I'm a speck, living on a speck, orbiting a speck in the middle of specklessness. But then I think, I'm this little brain. I have this brain. It's only this big to think about all of this. To think about the vast emptiness of space. I can reason that I'm a speck on a speck in the middle of specklessness. And that's cool. That's worthy of respect. And you can't help but wonder, with those billions and billions of specks, are there other specks out there? That would change everything. Because then you know that these little brains are not alone. And that, my friends, is worth thinking about.
That would change everything. These little brains are not alone.
Was he trying to come back into relevance with that?
That was a really honest look at what Bill Nye has struggled with, right? And where his worldview is. He isn't sure when it comes right down to it, I don't think. And when you look at that, he's looking so hard. He also understands that humans need something beyond our own existence. We need something beyond us, right? And again, he's hoping for maybe aliens, right? That's kind of the line they're throwing out there and hoping for, instead of God, right? But God is the answer, obviously, and we're gonna see that in a second. But it's really interesting to see, for me to see, like a video like that, how honest he is in that video, you know? At the same time of his struggling to try to make sense of it all. And that is a pretty lonely, hopeless way to look at the world, right? But in some ways, if you believe in a God, or if you believe in God even, and all you see is how God is transcendent and big and powerful and mighty, that's kind of actually where you're almost left. You know, somebody who believes they're following the God of the Bible, who doesn't believe in God's eminence in everyday life, would be kind of in that boat a little bit, right? Hoping for a savior, but not seeing one, maybe, right? So, and in some ways, they're not too far off. There's scripture that kind of back up their perspective, right? Because they're only partially off. So here we go. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. Thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. How important are we? Well, so far, it doesn't sound like very important. We're a speck on a speck living in specklessness. He goes on in to another video he gave at a presentation to talk about how awful of a person he is and how he doesn't matter at all, basically, right? Which is the logical conclusion, and honestly, without our Creator involved in all of that and the redemptive work of Jesus, we kind of land in that category too. And part of the reason why I'm camping out in this for a little bit is because I think it's helpful for us to understand the grace of God and what God did for us. We need to understand how big God really is so that we understand what He really did, which is pretty unbelievable in many ways. It's not that it's hard to believe that there's an evidence for it, but it's hard to wrap your mind around it. Okay, Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That kind of fits with this speckless outcome, right? We're in trouble. Okay, this one is Richard Dawkins. So this is the interview he did with Ben Stein from Expelled. Did any of you get to see that video when that came out? A few of you did? This is his interview. Richard Dawkins is a British evolutionary biologist and author and one of the most influential evolutionists of the time, right? Is this guy right here. So we're gonna, oh, I don't even have that one up here. I wasn't showing you here anyway, but that's okay. I've told you what it is now. So we're set. So we're gonna go back and find it. So remember, this is a leading evolutionary biologist trying to explain the start of the universe, right? From his worldview. Here we go.
Atheist also.
And extremely atheist, yes, very openly.
And spends every time he gets a chance cursing and defaming Christianity.
Which I don't have that on this video, so don't worry. But the cursing parts or anything like that. But he's very much against anything that is Christian. But listen to how he explains this. I think this is very interesting.
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anyone.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that their intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God. So that they...
Interesting, huh? So the leading evolutionist in the world, arguably, says, we don't know how it started. Nobody knows. Yet we're printing that in all of our textbooks as we absolutely know how everything began, right? And he's saying nobody knows how it began. Maybe it was aliens, right? Can't get away from that because you don't want to admit the existence of God if you don't want to be accountable to a higher power. And if you can't wrap your brain around the idea that God is transcendent and all-powerful and also here and immanent, right, with us today. It's really hard to bring those things together. And so these are all people who are legitimately, I think in some ways, trying to wrap their brain around all of that, seeing the evidence. And it's also interesting to me that all three of these scientists are willing to jump in and say it must have been aliens, when there's a lot less proof for aliens than there is for the Christian God of the Bible. right? A whole lot less. There's a ton of proof about God, and no proof, really, substantially, about aliens. So, anyway. Okay, then there's some scientists from a ways back. Let's look kind of before, right? Before this became a major political issue, or before this became something where science was skewed pretty far off, right, with biases. So, this is something Einstein said. The eternal mystery of the world is its incomprehensibility. The fact that it is comprehensible is a miracle. Do you remember we talked the next day, I think it was, some about, or maybe that yesterday, about the forces that govern the universe? Do you remember that conversation we had? And those forces were things like gravity, right? What were some of the other ones? Electromagnetism. Do you remember another one? Strong nuclear force and weak nuclear forces.
Yeah.
Those are things that can't have evolved. They have no genetic materials, yet they always work exactly the same way every single time. Because God put them in place that way, right? There is no other answer for that other than God created it that way. And this is something that Einstein understood in some capacity. Was he necessarily Christian all the way? No. But did he definitely understand that a creative mind of some sort, God, must have designed the universe to work off of certain rules? He absolutely understood that. Here's another quote from him. This is Kepler, I guess. Kepler, however, was an astronomer who definitely was Christian. And since we astronomers are priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature, it befits us to be thoughtful, not of the glory of our minds, but rather, above all else, of the glory of God. Okay, here's an astronomer, kind of the father of astronomy and a bunch of other science stuff, telling us that, right back in the day. And he also has this one. I was merely thinking God's thoughts after him, when asked about how is he making all these discoveries. What is he learning, right? He was just thinking God's thoughts after him, discovering what God already put in place. That's kind of a different way to look at it, isn't it? A couple different contrasting kind of worldviews there. Okay, here's a verse from Colossians. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. You remember those forces, those four forces? Especially, well, actually gravity too. All of those forces. Think about it for a second. Gravity holds the planets together, holds gases on the planets, right? Holds each individual planet together, holds us to the planets. Do you think God is involved with holding things together? Definitely. We're going to see that in our own bodies in a little bit too. How about a different one, the nuclear forces? Do you realize if those nuclear forces didn't exist, there's a lot of empty space. Protons, neutrons, electrons would just go nuts. Everything would just explode or implode or something else explode. We don't really know. It'd be nuclear reactions everywhere. And all this energy would just go crazy. There'd be no chance of anything staying together. Except for those laws, the forces that govern how things work that God put in place. So I think when this says he is before all things and in him all things hold together, I think he's talking about things like fundamental forces too, right? The laws that are in place, the forces that are in place that we're beginning to wrap our brains around more and more all the time. Those things definitely hold things together. So here's one from Isaiah 57:15. For this is what the high and exalted one says, he who lives forever, whose name is holy. I live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite. This one is interesting because now we're getting into a point where we're beginning to see how God's transcendence, how big God is coming to a point where it also is kind of reconciling, beginning to work with the fact that God is in everyday life and is in it, right? And so this verse is one that begins to touch on that. He's not going to revive the heart of the contrite. He's not going to care about our hearts if he's transcendent. Right? Not at all. And in many of the Psalms, it compares or contrasts those two things. This is something people have struggled with and worked through a long time because they don't make sense in our brain that God would be so big and still care about us. Who is like the Lord our God, the one who sits enthroned on high, who stoops down to look on the heavens and the earth? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He sets them with princes and the princess. He sets them with princes and the princes of his people. If God is big and powerful, it doesn't make any sense to me that He'd come down to dust, right? And work with the needy. Except for He created us, so He loves us, right? As our Creator. Which is part of what they just aren't understanding when they're talking about a big and hopeless world, right? It's a little bit of it. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Psalm 147:4. You asked, Adam, how many stars you can see in the night sky. The answer is 9,096 on a perfectly clear night with the human eye. The actual number of stars way exceeds that. That means verses like, there's a couple different verses that talk about how many stars are in the sky, and it compares it with sand grains, right? On the earth. Well, back in the day when those verses were written, they had no idea how many stars were actually in the sky. They could only see 9,000 and some of them tops ever. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered, so don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. So these are all verses that talk about how God is immanent. He's involved in our daily life. And when I was thinking about the hairs on our head being numbered, I was thinking about that and realizing that we lose hairs all the time, and somehow He still numbers them. Which probably means not only was He involved in knitting us together in our mother's womb, but He's keeping track of us day to day, right? Hour to hour, minute to minute as well. Okay, we're going to hear now from Bihi, who is a biochemist.
So I'm just...
Whoa. Hang on, that last one was really quiet. The mixing is out on the sound. We'll try not to blast you too much here. Okay, here we go.
This man has just suffered a serious stroke. His best chance for a full recovery is to receive proper medical treatment within 90 minutes. A 911 call alerts a dispatcher. The dispatcher alerts the local emergency medical technicians. The EMT determines it is likely a stroke. The call is made to the hospital. The doctor notifies the team that the patient is inbound. When the patient arrives, he receives rapid, stroke-specific care.
We just witnessed an efficient and very impressive response system that resulted in a good outcome for the patient. Today we're going to look at a similar emergency response system, one that has assisted in my own life, and in your life too, many times over. A cut in a person's skin allows blood to flow freely. But with a cut this size, in a short time, the bleeding stops on its own. How does it do that? The answer is not that the blood just dries up and plugs the hole. It stops because of a sophisticated emergency response system operating under her skin. It's called the blood clotting cascade, and it's one of the true wonders of human physiology. Here's an overview of how it works. Here's the cut from the thorn. As the red blood cells flow out, there's nothing to stop them. This does not look good for our gardener. But watch this. These are chemical signals. It's a 911 call. And here come our body's first responders. They're called platelets. They might not look impressive, but they're actually mighty morphing heroes. As they land, these remarkable transformers stretch out and begin to form a plug. They also release more chemical messengers to summon reinforcements. More platelets arrive, and eventually the outflow is slowed. Whew, it's a good start, but this barrier isn't strong enough to hold for long. We actually need a different team of transformers to save the day. The system activates another series of chemical signals. To the rescue comes an absolute marvel of molecular biology, fibrinogen. These guys do serious work, and their powers need to be used judiciously. So, at the correct time, thrombin shows up to activate it. The fibrinogen molecules then transform into fibrin. Now, watch as the fibrin link end to end to make strands, and they form a super secure mesh. This process is called coagulation. Thanks to the quick work of our elegant response team, the gardener won't bleed out, and the disaster is averted. That is, unless coagulation continues and the expanding clot blocks her blood vessel. Not to worry, other heroes join the fray. Two of the strongest are antithrombin and thrombomodulin. They switch off thrombin, and the fibrinogen is not activated to become fibrin. Later, the cleanup crew arrives. A critical component is plasminogen. When activated, it becomes plasmin. Plasmin is an eating machine. It dissolves fibrin once its work is done. Finally, her body heals the wound and the clot dissolves away. So think about that next time you cut yourself shaving. It's really a beautiful, finely tuned system.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Turns out in our own body that happens all the time, but so many more things than that. There's some that are so small within how a cell works too, it's unbelievable how God put that all together. Anyway, that sort of thing really suggests to me that God does care about our everyday life and hold things together, right? If he designed things that do that and is involved with that sort of stuff, that's incredible. Okay. So, we're going to come back to that. That might have been too much of a hint for you. But here we go. So, when we're talking about how big God is, and how God still cares about us in everyday life, so how God is involved in the small things, that concept, those things, point to one individual in the Bible, right? And who is that? Who's at the center of that? Who is highlighted by that?
God.
It's the right Sunday school answer half the time, right? Or more, all the time. So it's going to be Jesus who's at the center of that, right? God's Son, because he is God in the flesh, right? And he came to save us all from sin. The same things that those scientists at the beginning were talking about and how they're just hoping aliens show up to save them. We know as Christians that Jesus is the answer to that, right? And that's God's plan for salvation. So, and we've seen that in John 3:16. So which kid can recite John 3:16? I bet you somebody in here can. Guaranteed. Go for it. Who's brave? Who's going to do
For
it?
God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whoever should believe in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Paraphrase.
Yeah. So we see that in the Bible. That brings us back to the Carl Sagan quote. Remember, he was the guy we kind of heard from at the beginning, who believed in aliens saving the world, right? That clip that I took that out of, it goes on to talk about his hope and faith basically in aliens coming to our rescue eventually, but not in the near future, right? So this is him, when he would defend himself against being an atheist, because he really did not want to be called an atheist, right? This is what he'd say: I am not an atheist. An atheist is someone who has compelling evidence that there is no Judeo-Christian Islamic God. He's very specific about what an atheist is, right? I am not that wise, but neither do I consider there to be anything approaching adequate evidence for such a God. Okay? Why, look at this in bold, why are you in such a hurry to make up your mind? Why not simply wait until there is compelling evidence? Okay? I am going to just speculate that in this room we can probably answer those two questions for him right now. Okay? But he died in 1996 with this belief. Okay? And I'm pretty sure he didn't know Jesus. So, but we're going to go ahead and attempt to answer those questions for him right now and for ourselves. Why are you in such a hurry to make up your mind?
Time is short.
Because time is short, right? Because you might die before. And if you die not knowing Jesus, what do we deserve? Yeah. You know, death and hell and wailing and gnashing of teeth and all the other awful stuff. Separation from God, all those things together. If you want a summary of what that's like, read Luke 16, 19 through 31. Okay, that's the parable in the Bible. And it's not great sounding. I would not want that. So, you know, why should we be eager to tell people about Jesus? Because that's an actual answer. That's not waiting on aliens that probably don't exist. Pretty sure. You know? That's a real answer. So how about we try to answer this other one? Okay, hang on, there we go. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. That's more a picture of heaven, right? I don't know about Carl Sagan, evidently, but I would much prefer this over the alternative. Okay, what about a second question? Why not simply wait until there is compelling evidence?
There already is.
Yeah.
There already is.
There already is. We've been talking about some of it, and it's a lot of it. I mean, really, if only God gave us some compelling evidence in the world, right? Maybe some written book about how to live out life or how things really work in the universe. Okay, if only that existed.
This thing.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. So, obviously, he didn't hold the Bible to account as an incredible source or something, or he never read it, one of the two.
In addition to this specific question, the story Jesus told of the rich man and Lazarus in hell. The answer, because he wanted Lazarus to go back and tell his brothers so they wouldn't have to come to hell.
Yeah, you know,
God said if you already know, if you don't believe by now, you're not going to.
I thought about reading it. You know what, I'm just going to read that. It's not a very long parable. It'll be a good one to read. Okay, the rich man and Lazarus. So this is a parable Jesus was telling. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. Right? And then this is the part you're talking about. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them, which we also have that information, right? In the Bible. No, Father Abraham, he said, here we go. Where was I? He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Right? So nothing's going to convince somebody who isn't willing to acknowledge the Bible, right? And believe in it, and what Moses and the prophets gave us from God, right? What they passed on to us. Okay. So why not wait till there's compelling evidence? Well, that's one reason. There is plenty of compelling evidence in Scripture, right? No doubt. Here's another verse that deals with that. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So that's saying that the created world exists. It's evidence of God, and people who don't believe that are without excuse, right? Because of how amazing the world is around us and the stuff we've been looking at. So is there an answer? What did these scientists at the beginning, who were searching for an answer so desperately, not find? What did Carl Sagan not find before he died in 1996?
That Jesus is going to save.
That Jesus could save him, right? If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thy heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. Romans 10:9. Okay? So God put a plan in place. What's amazing to me is the way that we look at the transcendence, how big God is, and the immanence, how God's in the small things. And Jesus is at the center of that as well. It really highlights the gospel message.